On the evening of January 29, 2025, a passenger jet was seconds from landing in Washington, D.C., when an Army helicopter crossed in front of it. 67 people died, 64 on the airplane, 3 on the helicopter. A year later, the National Transportation Safety Board published its final report. More than 300 pages, free to anyone who wants it. This video is based on that report and the board's public findings. Inside it is a detail that changes the shape of the story. The helicopter was carrying equipment whose sole purpose was to tell everyone else in the sky where it was. It had not worked in years. Nobody at the unit knew, because checking it was not anybody's job. American Airlines Flight 5342 was a small regional plane flying in from Wichita, Kansas, with 60 passengers and 4 crew members on board. The captain was 34 and had landed at Reagan National dozens of times. Colleagues told investigators he was exceptional at flying and completely standard in his procedures, which in that profession is the highest compliment available. His first officer was 28, and a captain who had flown with him described him as sharp. The helicopter was a Black Hawk, call sign PAT-25, short for Priority Air Transport. It belonged to an Army unit based at Fort Belvoir, just down the river in Virginia. 3 people were on board. A 28-year-old Army captain was flying and being assessed on it. A 39-year-old chief warrant officer sat beside her as her instructor. A staff sergeant sat behind them as crew chief, a man his colleagues described as unusually good at spotting traffic. All 3 were wearing night vision goggles. One more thing to know before the clock starts. Helicopters around Washington do not fly wherever they like. They fly published corridors, like lanes painted onto the sky. The one that runs down the eastern edge of the Potomac, past Haines Point toward the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, is called Route 4. In that stretch, the ceiling is 200 feet. Remember that number. The helicopter lifted off from Fort Belvoir that evening on a training flight. Just after 8:30, it reached Cabin John, Maryland, dropped to 800 feet, and turned south, running the river past the Key Bridge and the Memorial Bridge, with the city lit up beside it. The crew's own recorder caught them talking about how badly the tower was coming through. The report describes many of the transmissions that night as incomplete or broken. Meanwhile, Flight 5342 was coming up from the south, set up to land straight in on runway 1. Then, at 8:43, the controller asked the crew to do something else. Could they take runway 33 instead? Runway 33 sits at an angle, and getting onto it means swinging out over the water and curling back in. The captain ran the landing numbers with his first officer. The recorder caught him saying he did not really want to, then that it was fine, and they would do it. That change put an airliner over the river. It put it over Route 4. 3 minutes later, the controller told the helicopter crew about traffic just south of the Wilson Bridge, a regional jet at 1,200 feet, circling for runway 33. The 2 aircraft were 6.5 miles apart. 5 airplanes were coming in from the south that night, one behind another, in the dark. The instructor pilot said he had the traffic in sight and asked for visual separation. That request matters, so it is worth being clear about what it means. Asking for visual separation is a crew formally taking responsibility for staying clear of another aircraft using nothing but their own eyes. The controller approved it. There were 2 problems with that. The helicopter's recorder captured the controller's message without the words circling, and the sky the crew was looking into had 5 sets of landing lights. At 8:47 and 29 seconds, the airliner turned onto its final approach. The first officer called 2 white, 2 red, the light signal that means the aircraft is exactly where it should be on the way down. 4 seconds later, a conflict alert appeared on the controller's screen. What follows takes 20 seconds. The controller asks the helicopter whether it has the jet in sight. In the airliner's cockpit, a voice announces traffic. The report found that the crew did not acknowledge it and did not discuss looking for it. The 2 aircraft are a mile apart, closing at about 200 knots. The controller transmits again. Pass behind that CRJ. At that exact moment, one of the helicopter pilots presses the transmit button. It lasts 0.8 of a second. The report found that this blocked the middle of the controller's sentence. The words the crew needed were the words that went missing. The instructor pilot says again that he has an aircraft in sight. He asks again for visual separation. 6 seconds from impact, he tells the pilot to come left. The helicopter is at 266 feet. The ceiling on that route, the number worth remembering, is 200. They meet at around 278 feet above the river. The report found that the airliner's crew did not see the helicopter until roughly 1 second before the collision. None of what caused this is left unexplained in the report. The board wrote down what it believed went wrong, and then it wrote down 3 further things that most accounts of this collision leave sitting on the page. Those 3 things are the rest of this video. Subscribing helps more of these get made. The investigation took close to a year. Investigators pulled both recorders and the wreckage out of the river, including both of the helicopter's altimeters. They flew the route themselves at night, wearing the same night vision goggles, and photographed what an airliner on approach actually looks like through them against a city full of lights. They rebuilt the view from both cockpits second by second, working out what each crew could physically have seen at any given moment. They ran simulations of safety systems the aircraft were not fitted with to establish what those systems would have done, and they went into the records. Years of FAA surveillance data around the airport, the Army's own maintenance and flight history for the unit the helicopter came from. The board adopted 74 findings. It issued 50 new safety recommendations, 33 of them to the FAA. Its conclusion was not about the pilots. The board found the probable cause was the FAA's placement of a helicopter route directly beneath a runway approach path, its failure to regularly review that route and the data available about it, and its failure to act on recommendations to reduce the risk of a mid-air collision near the airport. It also blamed a system that leans on visual separation to keep traffic moving, without accounting for how badly human eyes perform at night against a lit city. The board did list contributing failures on the night. The helicopter crew did not apply visual separation effectively. The tower team had lost track of the situation, working 2 jobs at once during a busy period with no process for judging when that becomes unsafe. And the Army had never made sure its pilots understood how much error their altimeters are permitted to carry, which is why the helicopter was above its route ceiling. But the cause came first, and the cause was the design. Start with the geometry, because it is the part that survives every other explanation. Where Route 4 passes beneath the approach to runway 33, the report puts the notional vertical clearance between a helicopter at its ceiling and an airliner on the correct descent path at about 75 feet. 75 feet! That is the gap when everybody does everything right. Most of the Army pilots investigators interviewed believed that staying at or below their published altitude kept them clear of airliners. It did not. Nothing on the chart said so. And the approach charts the airline crews were using did not show the helicopter routes at all. 2 sets of professionals were reading 2 different maps of the same sky. When the FAA was later asked to produce evidence that it had carried out the annual reviews of these helicopter routes, it could not. Second, the alerting. The airliner had a collision avoidance system that worked exactly as designed. Below a certain height, it is deliberately restricted to warnings only. It can tell a crew that traffic is nearby. It is not permitted to tell them to climb, because at low altitude an automatic instruction to climb could lead to something worse. So the crew was told there was traffic, and nothing more. The report concludes they never understood how bad it was. The board ran the numbers on lowering that restriction. In simulation, doing so cut the risk of a mid-air collision by more than 90%. Third, the equipment. The most repeated fact about this collision is that the Black Hawk was not broadcasting its position. That is true, and it was policy. Army procedure specified not broadcasting on this type of mission, and crews were barred from switching modes in flight anyway. What the report adds is that it could not have broadcast even if someone had wanted it to. The switch was found in the on position. An incorrect setting installed in the equipment was stopping it. Then investigators looked at the rest of the unit. The accident helicopter had no history of transmitting. 7 more of the same model had not transmitted since 2023. 8 aircraft were silent, and the Army was unaware of the problem on any of them because no procedure required anyone to check that the system was working. The board was careful about what this did and did not mean. Even if the helicopter had been broadcasting, it would not have helped, because the airliner had no equipment capable of receiving it, and the controller's display would have looked the same. Which is the last thing, and the one that ties it together. In this report, the board recommends that aircraft required to broadcast their position also be required to receive everyone else's. That recommendation is numbered A2630. It is not a new idea. Responding to the report, the chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee counted 17 previous occasions across roughly 2 decades on which the board had asked for the same thing. This makes 18. A safety recommendation is not an order. The board investigates and publishes. It cannot compel the FAA to do anything at all. Its only enforcement mechanism is the public record. 6 weeks into the investigation, the board broke with its own procedure and issued 2 urgent recommendations without waiting for the report. The FAA closed the stretch of Route 4 between Haynes Point and the Wilson Bridge. It restricted the use of runways 15 and 33 while helicopters are operating nearby. The board later marked its first urgent recommendation closed and noted the FAA had gone further than it had asked. Visual separation between helicopters and airliners has since been suspended across most controlled airspace in the country. By law, none of this assigns blame in the legal sense. The board investigates to prevent the next one. Its reports cannot be used as evidence in a lawsuit for damages. A safety system is only ever as good as the person whose job it is to check that it is still switched on. The route's required annual review left no evidence it ever happened. 8 helicopters went silent, with no check assigned to any of them, and the recommendation that might have covered the gap had been written 17 times before anybody counted. The report is public and it is free, and the sections on the route and on the unit's equipment are worth reading in full. The link is below. 67 people were in the air over the Potomac that night, on 2 aircraft, on 2 radios, listening to the same controller, unable to hear each other.